We're joined with the one and only Esteban Carrillo. He's a Beirut-based Ecuadorian journalist and current editor for The Cradle. He was previously with Sir English, another great institution. Esteban, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Hi, Jamal. Good morning. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Glad to be on. Glad to be back
No,
here.
man, always glad to have you. The audience always loves you, and I always am appreciative that you give us your time to join us. Um, let's talk Lebanon for a bit. So, some of the reporting that came out, well, for one, Israel, would you agree with me that Syria is no more, at least in the way that we understood it?
In
This,
the way that we understood it for 50 plus years, yes, I agree with you.
yeah. All right. So the group that is taking over now has been carving it up. Turkey, Israel, and the terrorist groups, the HTS as they call them. Um, those seem to be the main powers that are in that region of the world. There, many of the people who are in, especially the minority groups, are fleeing Syria in droves and seem to be going into Lebanon, especially the Christians that want to get from under the Sharia law that is being implemented. I mean, I don't think people fully get it in the West, in the U.S. They are acting here in the United States as if this is some kind of great freedom exercise, missing the fact that, women who used to be on the beach in a bikini a few months ago now would be spit on if they even tried to do something like that. Or for that matter, the people who used to drink alcohol. Look, all of that
Yeah.
stuff is over with. So many of the churches have been destroyed. Many of those people have been killed in the streets and dragged through the streets with their cars. Like some of this stuff is grotesque.
hmm
How is Lebanon dealing with the influx of people fleeing into Lebanon? Lebanon was already under a huge amount of pressure from Israel. Israel has seen that stolen, the southern part of Lebanon. How are they dealing with the influx of migrants coming into the country?
It's difficult to tell in Lebanon because authorities aren't very informed. I would say, right? Like it's not even about keeping back information. It's just about I believe they don't really know a lot of things. Consider, Jamal, that Israel destroyed almost, I think, no, all of them, all of the border crossings between Lebanon and Syria during their 2-month blitzkrieg campaign in Lebanon. So you have, I don't know if this is still the case, but I know that up until a few days ago, there was no checkpoints at the borders. So you could just cross into Syria or from Syria. The Lebanese army has been deployed to the east, trying to deal with this influx. From what I've heard, in the Bekaa Valley in the east, there's a very big surge of refugees. There's a town called Hermel that is near the Syrian border. I read recently that that now the refugees, and not just from Syria, by the way, from Lebanon as well, right? Remember that many in Lebanon are still displaced. They
That's right.
outnumber the local population. They outnumber them by a significant margin. So all of a sudden, you have towns that are overrun by refugees in a country where the currency has shed over 90% of its value, where there is already, a crisis after crisis that just came out of a very brutal war. So I think, I told you this before when we were discussing this topic, that the refugee crisis in Lebanon has always been used by the West in particular as a pressure point, as an attempt to destabilize the country internally. In Lebanon, they have many strings to pull from when they want to destabilize, right? They can use the currency,
Right.
they can use the electricity, they can use Israel, of course, they can use the political crisis, and now they can use also the refugees. Because
Mhm.
Lebanon, before this war, already had about 500,000 Syrians. It's like a ridiculous amount.
Really?
I'm thinking more, actually. I apologize. I don't have the figures on hand, but
No,
it
no.
was a very large figure, that represented Lebanon. When you're talking about Lebanese people, you're talking between 5 to 6 million people, the actual population of Lebanon. So when you talk about 500,000 or even 1 million refugees, you're talking, about a significant amount of the resources are being drained there. And the
Right.
West and France, the US, Britain, always put roadblocks for the return, right? Because the Syrian government, before its fall, had been trying to get the refugees to return from Turkey, from Lebanon, from wherever they were, but at the same time asking, for a stop to the hostilities, for a lifting on sanctions, so that the government could provide Now we know where that led. Now we know, right? This new Syrian government led by a former ISIS and Al Qaeda commanders is talking about what is the word that they use? Respect, right? They talk about respect for the other sects. They talk about
Diversity.
wanting the refugees back, etc. That they're going to provide. That they're going to be a a good little government, a good little pet for the U.S. imperial project. But how, right? How do you see it? It's a tiger doesn't change its stripes, as you were saying, Jamal. They are the minorities in Syria do feel threatened. In the coastal towns, in Latakia, in Tartus, where it used to be, is Alawite majority, the stronghold of the Assad government, as you were saying. Syria is not an Islamic nation. Like Lebanon is not an Islamic nation either, right? Like in the middle, in West Asia, you have Iran and Israel, right? That are like fully religious governments. Everyone else is not. Everyone else is there are liberal democracies with majority-led parties that are either Sunni, Shiite, Christian sometimes. So it's not common, right? I feel like people in the West sometimes seem to forget and just lump everyone together in the Middle East as Muslims, right? Everyone's a Muslim, and everybody lives under Islamic rule, and that's simply not the case. And now you have Syria, a country that is, borders Turkey, borders Iraq, borders Jordan, borders Israel, and borders Lebanon, all of a sudden becoming an Islamic state, becoming a caliphate. This is what Syria is turning into, while the West is, just putting Julani and crew in the best, winter fashion from Gap, so that they look like the modern, diversity-friendly rebels.
He's a snappy dresser now. He's shaved the beard somewhat. He's got rid of the turban. He's in a suit.
Yeah, he's no longer wearing the Zelensky green, right? Now he's actually
right. right. He got out of the military Zelensky outfit.
Yeah.
It's so wild the way that works. I mean, like, there's still a bounty on the man's head.
Yeah.
And we're acting like we don't know where the guy is. Like, we don't know where he is.
You saw where Matthew Miller this week, right? The spokesman, he was being questioned, like, if somebody goes to Syria and arrests this man, are they going to get the bounty? And he's like, well, yes, because the bounty is still there.
Because Britain also has a bounty on his head. And what's wild, I was telling this to the audience because it's just mind blowing. Erdogan comes out and makes the speech, and in the speech he says, "Look, we need to fight terrorism in the region to prevent ISIS or the Kurds, because he considers both terrorists, obviously. We need to fight terrorism in the region. And we need to get rid of sanctions on the HTS government, and we need to give resources and support now to the government." So it's like, now that we've gotten rid of Assad, we need to now put a huge amount of money so we can help these jihadists make a state in a way that Assad could never make, because we were stealing all of the resources. And then to double that, I would imagine him going after the oil and the wheat that's in the areas that the Kurdish population is stealing. Like, so from your take, I mean, how do you think that's going to work? It seems like they're going to come to odds with Israel at a certain point. I mean, both of them are effectively stealing Syrian territory. Israel is continuing to take territory, even though it's doing so kind of quietly. I would imagine this is going to run roughshod or run headlong into Erdogan at some point. Do you see these governments coming into conflict with one another?
I don't, they're so, what's the word I'm looking for? They're so friendly, in the end. They are so willing to just work with each other. Turkey has, I say this every time you bring me on, they have the power to stop the oil flow to Israel. And they don't. They've chosen not to. And now, as you're saying, in Syria, there's two main winners here. And one is Israel, that all of a sudden has expanded its territory by about 500 square kilometers, with absolutely no opposition from the liberators of Syria, not a bullet. The rebels in the south are handing over their weapons to the Israeli army. They are just giving them everything they have.
By the way, wouldn't even complain about it. When it was brought up to Jelani, he was like, "Hey, we don't have the force to do anything about it." Wouldn't
because
criticize.
you got bombed, because they bombed like over 500 times this country that you just liberated, and you did nothing. You said nothing. You didn't even issue a statement condemning it. You just stood by and watched because they are your allies.
Technically, he did, but only after getting criticized for it. It's almost like one of his handlers said, "Hey, man, you have to say something about this. This looks bad." Yeah, it sounds exactly like that, because in the very beginning, when his political person, when they were talking to him, not Jelani himself, it was, I guess, the media communication person, and they said, "Hey, Israel has been taking all of this territory. They've been bombing the land. I mean, you don't have anything to say about this?" No, they had nothing to say about it. And then later, you got the comment of, "Hey, we need the Western community to help us because Israel is bombing our territory." But that is after like a week or two of Israel.
After everything's been destroyed. Everything's been destroyed, all of a sudden you concern yourself. So to go back to your initial question, Jamal, about Turkey, my take is that I don't think that they're going to really come into conflict, because Turkey is of a single mind at this point. And that is to take out the Kurds, right? Turkey, I feel, in my view, that they saw, what Israel's getting away with in Gaza, and they thought, why can't we do the same? Why can't we just go in and start killing the Kurds that we, that are control, as you're saying, the north of Syria? They help the United States occupy the northeast. They help them control the oil and wheat rich regions, which they smuggle into Syria with U.S. help, into U.S. bases, resell with the help of the semi-autonomous government over there, and then use it to fund their own operations, right? It's like they themselves get this money back. Turkey has recognized one of the main backbones of this organization, right? The Kurdistan Workers' Party, which is allied with the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is these U.S. proxies, as a terrorist organization. And they have been waging war in North Syria, in North Iraq against them for a while now, for a few years now. So now what Turkey is doing is they are providing air support and weapons to the Syrian National Army. There's so many acronyms in Syria, it's just like one after the other. The Syrian National Army is a coalition of former Syrian army members, former members of the Free Syrian Army, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS members as well. And they are launching this offensive in the north against the Kurds, threatening their control of this region, right? East of Aleppo and further. But the real question here is, how far are they going to go? Is the U.S. going to step in at some point? Because these are their allies in the end. And third, for me, the biggest question is, what's going to happen when these former ISIS and Al-Qaeda members get to the prisons that are holding about 10,000 ISIS fighters? Are they going to keep them in prison? Are they going to,
that's super interesting. That's right, because the prisons are in the Kurdish territory. You're so right. Yeah.
There's about 10,000, and then on top of that, there's about 50,000 of their families, of their women, children, children that have been in prison from birth, right? From birth, they have been born into these prisons. They are the kids of these ISIS fighters, and there's so many of them because Western nations. Because remember, Jamal, about I think it's 5,000 of those held are Syrians, 3,000 are Iraqis, and 2,000 are from North America, are from Europe, and are from Central Asia. And all of their governments have refused to repatriate them. The US refuses to repatriate them, the UK, France, Germany, everyone refuses to repatriate them. The only ones who have been for the past couple of years repatriating their own ISIS fighters or the families from these camps is Iraq. Iraq is the only nation that has been repatriating, by the hundreds in general, and dealing with them, in the way that that their justice system calls for. But that is the real question here, Jamal, because Turkey is very comfortable with ISIS. Let's be honest. They hate the Kurds. They hate the PKK. These are the terrorists for them. But ISIS, all of these Sunni extremists, they don't mind too much. And it's the same case with Israel. ISIS and Al-Qaeda, etc., they have never attacked Israel. Right? As you're saying, are they going to come into conflict? I think the only time they would ever come into conflict is if all of a sudden these Sunni extremists decide that they actually do care about Gaza. All of a sudden, if they decide to take care about Palestine, then they will come into conflict with Israel and by extension, possibly Turkey. But until then, no, I think it's fair game.
You raise a fascinating question. I mean, look, Western media is pretending as if these guys have moderated. And I agree that they're putting on this kind of act, this patina of moderation, while they're ignoring kind of the nasty parts that are taking place. They're pretending this is some kind of democracy. Fair enough. I don't get the sense that Erdogan is going to stop his attack on the Kurdish forces, even with Blinken begging him, even with Kennedy and Congress screaming that we should help the Kurds, all of that stuff. I get the sense that if Trump gets in, we will sell the Kurds out. And hell, Joe Biden may even sell them out. And what it brings to the question is, because up to this point, there's, as you pointed out, the offensive that's taking place against the Kurds. The Kurds are losing territory. They have been begging Israel for help, for God's sake. These groups are made up of all sorts of groups, meaning HTS is just kind of an acronym, but there are all sorts of, like say, Al-Qaeda, ISIS.
There is like 37 factions that make up this
It's like
alliance.
all like this alphabet suit of groups. If they hit Kurdish territory, meaning if they hit that area where it has the wheat, the oil, and apparently the prisons, what happens? I mean, do you think that the U.S. is going to get involved militarily in order to protect Kurdish forces against the Turks? I don't see that.
And the Kurdish have already been sold out by the U.S., at least more than once through the decades. So I don't think, as you're saying, in particular with Trump, right? Because I feel like the main difference between a Donald Trump government and a Joe Biden government is about forms. Right? It's about
also Trump is going to pull the troops out.
Trump has been wanting to pull the troops out of Syria. This is why he ordered his new defense minister, right? He said you need to clean the Pentagon. You need to clean the swamp, I guess would be the correct term.
Drain the swamp. Drain the swamp.
Yeah, because he's in his first term, he ran into all of these generals that oppose and sabotage his attempts to pull out of Syria. Why? Yeah. Because Syria is a very strategic, is a very important. There's a reason why Syria has been destabilized for so long. If Syria didn't matter, we wouldn't even hear about it. It would just be like Haiti. It would just be like another disaster that nobody gives any coverage to. But no, Syria is a very important geostrategically for the Gulf, for Turkey, for Europe, for the US, and for Iran, for Russia, who what's going to have for everyone. Everyone wants a piece of Syria, and I think this is what we're seeing now. This is why I think you are correct when you said is Syria over, right? And I think yes, the Syrian Arab Republic is over. Whatever comes next, who knows? I'm calling it the Caliphate of Syria. I hope it doesn't turn into that. But with the leaders in charge, where else is it going to go? What is the U.S. going to do? The U.S. The question for them is really gonna come down to: are the Kurds more useful to us than rampaging ISIS? And they've been referring to the camps in ISIS since 2019 or 2018, and up until this week, when some officials spoke to Politico, they have been talking about it as an army in waiting, an ISIS army in waiting, right? Consider this: next year, the U.S. agreed to pull out from Iraq. They said to pull out from Iraq by the end of 2025, maximum by early 2026. If all of a sudden you have rampaging ISIS, cells all over the Iraqi border, possibly inside Iraq as well, then why would the U.S. pull out? Right, their mission is not over yet. Same for Syria. Same for Syria. Why would we pull out when all of a sudden ISIS is running rampant in the northeast of Syria and in the Kurds, they're not gonna care too much about selling them out. It's been a very interesting week in terms of government statements from the U.S. because you have Miller, I think it was also this man. he's always for absolute the worst of the worst, the scum of the earth.
Looks like a joker. Yeah.
He's he said like at least 3 times over the past 3 years, over the past week, that a ceasefire is holding, that a ceasefire has been reached between the SNA and the SDF in North Syria. And as soon as he makes this statement, the SNA launches new attacks, and Turkish drones are flying and dropping bombs in Kobani, where the SDF wants to, the Kobani in the north of Syria that borders Turkey, a Kurdish majority city, where the SDF is begging at this point, please make it a demilitarized zone. They're desperate, the Kurds. They're absolutely desperate because they see that, on the one side, their allies in the US come out, with their suit and tie and say, there is a ceasefire. There's a ceasefire that's been holding and is going to hold until the end next week. And then, moments later, these former ISIS and Al-Qaeda fighters with Turkish air support are coming at them with absolutely no regard for this ceasefire. Wow. So they are looking for a way out. They are looking for their own survival, which they should. In the end, we shouldn't be promoting a second genocide just because there are a bunch of U.S. Proxies that have always served the purposes of this empire project. But in any case, I don't think the U.S., unless it suits their interests, is gonna lift a finger. Right? They didn't lift a finger when ISIS was marching on to Damascus and took Palmyra in Syria. They didn't lift a finger when ISIS took control of Mosul. They didn't lift a finger when ISIS, killed thousands and thousands of Yazidis in Iraq, another genocide. The U.S. was observing all of this. The U.S. was there. The U.S. Army was there, and they were just sitting in their hands. Why? Because geostrategically, this actually helps them, right? This helps their objectives. So now, if all of a sudden you have a massive ISIS jailbreak in the northeast of Syria, is the United States really going to care that much? All of a sudden, I think Syria, in the end, what it has become is a hub for transnational terrorism.
Right.
And you need to consider the proximity to Europe and the proximity to Asia as well. So I think with the birth of this new terror state in Syria, it's not going to stay contained. It's not going to stay contained in Syria. It's not going to stay contained even to the region, right? It's not just like Lebanon and Iraq that need to fear this. It's the entire world. Because all of a sudden, how did the war in Syria start? When all of these extremists from around the world were riled into a passion to come and liberate Syria and create the caliphate, the ISIS caliphate. That there's a big difference between an Islamic republic, which is what Iran is, which seeks to it's a very it's not
elements of democracy
nations, as opposed to an Islamic caliphate that is a global pursuit. It's not just about this country or this group of countries. It's about the entire world.
I see. Wow. That is, I haven't heard anybody mention the jails at all. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Like nobody has brought that up. I mean, I was paying attention to the fact that the Kurds were being basically destroyed and that Erdogan had an interest in taking all of Syria, basically kicking out the Americans.
He wants Aleppo. He already speaks of Aleppo as part of Turkey.
Exactly. Yeah, I heard that. I saw that speech. I didn't get the translation, but I did see the speech where he mentioned that. The prison thing is fascinating. I mean, part of the Astana agreements, and correct me if I'm wrong, was for Turkey to separate the wheat from the chaff. Basically, who have legitimate protests, meaning legitimate grievances against the government but aren't terrorists, versus the people who are terrorists. Separate those people. Do you think the U.S. is going to end up with a similar thing for Turkey? Basically, we're pulling out our troops. Turkey, that's your responsibility to separate the terrorists and deal with the terrorists in that prison. I guess my sense is Trump, if anything, is probably going to pull the troops out and leave that responsibility to Turkey, which means the Kurds are screwed. But I could be wrong on that front. Do you think HTS is going to be able to hold it together? Because from my understanding, there are multiple groups that, like you said, there are 30-something groups or more that are composed of what they're calling HTS. And all of these groups have different priorities, different incentives. Some are more radical than others. Do you think this is going to be a melting pot, or this is going to end up with violence against these groups going after one another?
I mean, just to finish up with the topic of the prisons, if they leave, if the U.S. says okay, or if Turkey takes control of these prisons, I don't think it's going to be Turkey themselves. It's not going to be the Turkish army that is going to be controlling these prisons. They're going to hand the keys to their allies, to the SNA. So why would a former ISIS fighter keep his brother in arms in prison? Why? what pressure is there to do it? First of all, second of all, is HTS gonna keep control? I think they gave themselves until March 1st, right, for a transition and whatever. You have Jolani, who is now going by his actual name. Right now, he's going by Ahmed al-Shara. So that we start forgetting. It's this whole like a campaign to whitewash him, and to all of a sudden, he's not the former co-founder of Al-Qaeda in Syria. He's not the former deputy commander of the founder of ISIS, of al-Baghdadi. No, he's not him. He's someone else now. He's someone else who wears, the nice little shirt and with a trim beard. He is calling to give Syrian citizenship to the foreign fighters that helped them, right? And then all of a sudden you have official acknowledgement that this whole Syrian revolution was not very Syrian to begin with, right? If you have so many Central Asian fighters and so many Western fighters and so many fighters from who knows where else, even Ukrainians are involved in this mix. And that you need to give them citizenship, that you need to have the new, de facto ruler of Syria come out and say, we need to give all of these people citizenship, because first of all, I'm sure that was one of the agreements, right? And I'm sure he's being pressured by this. And as you're saying, this is not just Syrians who were upset with the government of Bashar al-Assad. Many things to be upset about, many reasons why Syrians would want it to end. These are extremists. These are people who want to impose Sharia law in Idlib, right? Idlib, the northwest city in Syria, where HTS is just rebranded Al-Qaeda, right? It used to be Al-Qaeda in Syria. It became the Nusra Front, and then it became Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is HTS as we know it. I'm sure they'll change the name soon enough again, so to keep confusing people. They control Idlib for I think since 2015. And they controlled it with an iron fist, right? Imposing Sharia law, imposing, taking control of humanitarian aid, enriching themselves. Jolani owns property in Turkey. He knows how to launder money. He's when we compare him when we call him the jihadi Zelensky, it's in more ways than one. It's not just the shirt. He also is very well versed at laundering money, and he's very well versed at keeping control via violence. Earlier this year, there were very big protests in Idlib against his rule, and he quashed them, right, with his security troops, aka Al-Qaeda, ISIS, going onto the streets. He did a whole purge of his command, the commanders, right, in HTS, because he felt that people were conspiring against him. So now that he's in control of the entire country, and we can say that he is. In reality, he's not, right? Jolani is in control of from Idlib to Damascus. Yes, he's in control. In the south, it's Israel that is in control. In the northeast, it's Turkey, obviously. And then in the rest of the country is the U.S. The U.S. is in control. So Jolani has control of this. He has to appease 37 groups, many of them former ISIS, former Al-Qaeda. You're going to tell them that this is going to be a liberal democracy. You're going to tell them that this is going to respect all of the religious sects, that people can celebrate Christmas, or that women can wear bikinis at the beach, or that there can be alcohol can be sold at bars, or that that mosques need to be respected, that churches need to be respected. How is that going to work? How are you going to reform these? And then on top of that, give them citizenship, make them Syrians. And it's a recipe for disaster, what Syria is. But I think we shouldn't see it as that being a bad outcome, because in reality, it's the only outcome. It's the reason why this was done. This was caused, right? Because what in a world in which war is not and terror is not as profitable as it is in ours, what you would have seen is a political process. You would have seen the lifting of sanctions. You would have seen, international organizations get involved. You would have seen the UN. You would have seen the Arab League. You would have seen Arab nations not work behind the scenes like they did, but actually take matters into their own hands. But this is not the world we live in. The world we live in is where ISIS 2.0 is a better idea than an actual Syrian government.
Do you believe that Arab states undermined Syria in this process? Like, because if you remember, for a while, it looked like Syria was getting closer to the Arab League. They invited them back into this kind of Arab League. They seemed to be having communication with Syria in a way that they weren't prior, meaning it seemed that they were bringing them back into the Arab fold of countries. But back in 2017, those Arab states were putting all of the money in the world to try to get rid of Assad.
Exactly.
Do you think that was true this time around, that they were shaking his hand, they were patting him on the back when really they were trying to figure out where they were going to stick the knife? Or do you think this wasn't the case, that it was Turkey, the US, Israel that were the main benefactors?
I wouldn't trust the Gulf leadership for a moment, for a second. I wouldn't give my back to them for 1 second, because these people are backstabbers. These people are, out for themselves, 100%. When you saw MBS, or you saw the UAE president welcoming Assad and like sitting with him and taking the pictures, shaking the hand. This was it's like the guillotine, just waiting to drop. So, but I think, as you're saying, right, in Syria right now, we're talking about two main winners in general, and we are forgetting about the Gulf, because it's many things, as you're saying. Nobody speaks about the jails because there's so many other things that are happening at the same time. Right. But the Gulf, and in particular, Qatar had a hand in what happened here, right? In coordinating with Turkey about what's happening, because all of a sudden Qatar and Turkey are back talking about this pipeline that was shut down in 2011 when this war started. When Assad initially said, "No, I don't want this pipeline," all of a sudden, fast forward 13 years, the pipeline is back on, because this was their aim, this was their design. And I think, as far as the other Gulf nations, they, I think what the fall of Syria means is a complete abandonment of Palestine, of the Palestinian cause.
Isolation of Gaza.
Because, exactly, at this point, Palestine and the Palestinians are completely isolated. Hezbollah, to some extent as well, is isolated. Iran and Hezbollah say that they have other ways, that they have, other routes, etc. I don't know. I cannot give you any actual information on that. Yep. But Palestine is completely isolated. So, and the Gulf states, when they saw these plans, and they saw what it would happen, and that HTS, has right now the upper hand, I guess, and we know that the Syrian army is going to fall, and we know that the Russians, because Jamar, let's be honest, everything that happened in Syria was agreed behind closed doors, 100%. You do not collapse a government in 11 days without having a deal first. It doesn't happen like that, right? Yeah. The army doesn't just lay down their weapons systematically, city after city, day after day, if a strategy is not already at play, right? This is not like this is not how the world works. So they knew this was the end. This was the end game. Is we isolate Palestine. We give Israel the buffers on the security and the territory that they want, and we get rid of Iran's possibly maybe the most important ally of Iran, right, and of the axis of resistance,
right?
Syria was a country, the Syrian Arab Republic, that for the past between 5 to 8 years, that was propped up because of Iran and because of Russia, because of the support that this government was being provided. Because if it didn't have that, Assad would have fallen way before. Yeah. But because of different interests, because of other considerations, he did, because in these countries helped them. But at some point, the decision was made, and I think the Iranians and the Russians also saw the writing on the wall. And from what we're hearing from them was Assad trusted in the Gulf. Assad trusted the Arabs. He thought that the U.S. was going to be, who knows what's true? Who knows, honestly? When will we know? It's going to be for sure a few years before we actually know the scope of what happened behind closed doors. But this was a decision to isolate Palestine and to quash this war by helping Israel. This is the Arabs telling the world, we don't care about Palestine, and we want Israel to be our partner.
Esteban, we're going to have to close it. But yeah, I just read the report yesterday that despite Saudi Arabia saying before, well, there needs to be a Palestinian state before we can talk. Now it's changed to there needs to be a pathway to Palestinian state before we can talk, which means they don't care. The leadership never cared. At the end of the day, they were just responding to public pressure. They're now going back to business as usual.
Exactly.
Esteban, man, thank you for this. Always appreciate your analysis. Esteban Carrillo. He's a Beirut-based Ecuadorian journalist and current editor for The Cradle. He was also with Syra English. Man, thank you, Esteban. Be safe,
Thank you,
man. Have a good
Jamal.
one.
Always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Bye-bye. All right.